Hey everyone, this is Scott, and I hope everyone's having a good day out there. In this video, I want to cover two topics. The bigger topic is how do you connect Slack to your iPaaS so that you can do all kinds of cool automation and workflow solutions for your business. And then secondly, I'm going to discuss how do I use OneFlow to route messages and data to other flows. And this is, I'm combining these two topics because when you are connecting Slack to your iPaaS, this pattern comes in handy. You're going to want to have just one flow that all the messages go to, and then from that flow, you're going to want to most likely route to lots of different flows. Okay, so first topic though, what is the best way to connect Slack to your iPaaS? And right now what we're looking at is our own Celigo instance of Slack. And here I have a view of my apps that I've created in Slack. And if you don't know what a Slack app is, anytime you want to do an integration with Slack and work with their APIs or pretty much do anything that extends Slack, you're going to create an app. Slack has beautiful documentation. And so I highly encourage you to read all about Slack apps and what you can do. But again, here's our Celigo instance. These are my apps. And the first kind of bit of advice that I want to give is you want to create an app for the solution that you're building. So a long time ago, we were building a Slack bot, and I just called it the Celigo bot. This is a very old app. And so then we would install the Celigo bot in various places, and you would interact with the Celigo bot. Very recently, we decided to build another app called Celigo AI, Artificial Intelligence, and now we're installing this app in various channels. So it's really nice to have an app per solution because in Slack, so let's bounce over to Slack. Here we're looking at a channel. You're going to install the app into the channel. So I've got a channel. I've installed this app by clicking Add Apps. I added Celigo AI. And then when users interact with your app, they're going to see Celigo AI as the thing that they're interacting with. And it's just really nice from a user perspective to have the app be the thing, like to name the app so that it's obvious what the app is doing and the type of solution it is. You don't want to have just like Celigo iPaaS as your app and it's doing all kinds of different things and people really don't know what they're dealing with. I definitely recommend having a specific app for each specific solution. Okay, so now, so recently, and this is the one I'm going to use as an example for this video, we launched the Celigo AI app so that we could introduce AI-based solutions into different Slack channels for different purposes. So there's a lot of projects that are either live, in motion, on the drawing board still with this approach, but we want one Celigo AI app that we add to different channels. And so I'm going to go over to the Celigo AI app, and then specifically, I'm not going to go through all these different tabs, but I wanted to go to the event subscriptions tab because that's really the key tab to hooking this into other systems. And then for us, it's an iPaaS. It's going to be Celigo's Integrator IO product. But you're going to enable events, and then it's going to ask you, hey, give me a URL. That every time there's an event that you have subscribed to, I'm going to send that event to this URL. And the key thing to notice is that you get one URL here. So it's got to be one URL that you send everything to, and that thing must be able to kind of parse and do different things with different messages from different places and so on. And that's kind of why we're going to also cover this using one flow to route to lots of flows. When needed. That's not always needed, but definitely it was needed in Celigo's case, and I'll show you why we decided to do that and when you should do it versus not. Okay, so I've enabled the events, and then you can subscribe to the different types of events. And here really all we're interested in is when users type something in one of these channels, where this app is installed. We want to get a message sent to our iPaaS for that event, for that thing that the user typed, and that's it. And you may ask, like, why hook up Slack to an iPaaS? And if that's not obvious, I think it should be pretty obvious to most people, but it's like when people are doing something in Slack and you send that event to your iPaaS, now what you can do is send that information anywhere in your business. Because remember, the iPaaS is what allows you to connect all your applications together. It's the glue that brings it all together. Typically, a business will have 100, 200 more apps, sometimes way more. And something like Slack, everyone uses. You can now intercept events and then go update any system. You can go get data from any system and send it back to Slack. You can let users ask questions. Slack is just a perfect interface that all users are in to then send stuff to the iPaaS, which can hide all the hard part of finding, and looking up things in other systems with APIs, and then respond back directly in Slack, so users never have to really leave Slack, which is where they like to work. So again, hooking up Slack to your iPaaS, very, very popular, very easy. And this is the first step, is just doing the Slack part. And again, the most important thing I recommend is just make sure you have a Slack app for each solution so that it's kind of obvious what that app is doing for users who are interacting with it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go over to the iPaaS, Celigo's Integrator iPaaS. And so again, and here what we're looking at is a flow, and this is a flow that I'm not going to go into other than looking at the listener. But this does an AI use case that I've covered in other videos, where users ask questions and it goes and looks up information in knowledge base documentation and tries to answer that question with a GPT-4 API call. Okay, so the listener is like the entry point into this flow, and you'll see that it has a URL. So whenever you create a listener, you are going to have a plus button when you first create it, and it's going to give you a public URL, and then you copy that URL and you paste it over back into Slack. It'll do like a challenge, so you'll save all that stuff, and then it's connected at that point. And then so once it's connected, every time in Slack a message comes in, it'll now get sent to this flow, assuming the flow is enabled. So if your flow is disabled, Integrator O will return an error back to Slack saying, hey, nothing here. But if the flow is enabled and there is at least one bubble that you're sending the data to, then now it's live. And so I always recommend just get the listener, put in like some dummy bubble. Maybe it just posts to some, like an HTTP API that doesn't really do anything, or a Splunk, or just some system. You can just post it, and then you'll just have a live flow that you can watch working right away. And then from the live flow where you see the data coming through, every time you post a message in Slack, you can continue to modify your flow to get it to do what you actually want. But it's nice to start off with that working flow. Okay, so in this case, so here we have this AI use case, we have the listener, and this is what we started off with. And really that was it. Like, we had a Slack app posting to this listener, and the flow was working perfectly. But then what happened is we decided to start our next project, where in Slack we wanted to create another channel called AI support. And in our AI support channel, all kind of the high level use case that we're going to build initially is a support rep can post a support ticket, and this will then get sent to a flow. And the flow will do a bunch of cool AI stuff to find tickets that are similar, to look up information that's related to the ticket in our knowledge base, try to generate an answer, or not an answer, but a response back to the customer. Maybe there is no way to do an answer, but we can ask the customer for the next set of questions. But we want the AI to kind of tee up the next thing that should be done for the ticket. And we're going to post all that in Slack at first, so that reps can just put a ticket, and we'll give them back the analysis and the next step, and then they're going to manually take action. We don't want to do anything, I've said this in other videos, with AI automatically. We always want a human to see what's being recommended and then to decide to take action or not based on what's in their brain, not the AI brain, because AI is not ready for that yet. And so we're going to do this useful tool in Slack, and then if it's promising, if all the support reps love this tool, we'll of course think about bringing it more natively into Zendesk itself. So when the ticket comes into Zendesk, we could automatically do the same stuff and not require the rep to log a ticket here. But we don't want to go putting a bunch of logic in Zendesk and custom fields and outbound messaging and all that stuff until we know we have something that people want. Again, coming up with that solution that your fellow employees want is the most important thing, and doing something in Slack is often a really nice way to test the waters on something. It's very easy for people to paste something in Slack, wait for a response, and then when enough people are in here using it, then you say, okay, let's take it to the next level and do something more native to Zendesk itself and not require this leap over to Slack. So anyway, that was a long side tangent, but okay. So back to this thing where we're building our second AI-based solution for a different team, and so now we want to install we installed our Slack app into this channel as well, and so now all the data is going to be going to our same listener. So okay, so here's where the problem arose, the challenge arose, and so it was coming over here, and so I could in this flow, do branching. So I could say, let's set up a branch for when messages come from the support channel. Let's route them through one branch in the flow, but if they come from our product KB channel, let's route them through another. That would work. So I could have just one flow, one listener, and use flow branching to route everything to the right place. But if I zoom out on this flow, it's already quite complicated. This is the one that does our AI KB, our AI knowledge base answers for the other channel. And I don't really want to add in another branch and have it, and there's another team of people working on this other solution. And have them in this flow, branching and making changes, and then having to scroll, and it seems kind of yucky having them do all that and mucking up this flow. So what we decided is let's just do all their work in another flow, and what we want is to have a third flow that kind of routes messages. So first I'll just show their flow before we go to the router. So here they have this similar flow, but just two bubbles right now. And this is what I talked about, where I always recommend, getting the bare minimum flow live, turned on, and data flowing. And so here we can see that, Ashita posted a ticket link, and the Celigo AI did an AI-generated answer just saying coming soon. And so now we know that this flow works end to end, and then we can build it out over time. But we're always working from a successful flow that we know is working end to end. And so here's her flow, and then okay, so now. And the nice thing too with two flows is like totally decoupled. So she can work, she can do her own thing. She's not going to break the other flow that the whole company is using a lot. It's like a much safer place to experiment and so on. So we totally decoupled the solutions. And then the magic that brings it all together is in I put in a third folder here into my kind of Celigo AI projects workspace called Common, and then I have a router flow. Okay, so this is just an interesting pattern that I wanted to share. This flow, all it does is listen and then route to other flows. And so you'll notice here, this listener says Slack at the top. And so the other ones that we saw said, Celigo, and that's because this one is actually listening to Slack. I could have a Slack listener in those other ones, but that's where they would need to all have their own app. Or I would need to be able to use the same listener as is without making any changes to data. And so anyway, This one has the Slack listener. All messages from Slack come in here, and I have a hook here that does some validation of the data, and also, so if it's not an event, or if the message came from the Celigo AI app itself, I'm filtering it, so I can do some generic kind of processing of the data. But after that, then I use branching, and so you can use flow branching based on the channel. So we can just say like, hey, what channel, if it equals this ID, then we're going to go down AI product KB. If it equals the AI support channel ID, then let's go down that branch. So I think that's pretty straightforward. And then if you need to see the channel ID, you go into your channel in Slack and just look at the bottom. There's the ID at the bottom. And okay, so I'm just using branching, and then I just create a generic HTTP import for each branch. And so all I'm doing here is posting data to the listener URL that I have in those other flows. So this is just a blind post. Records come into the listener, they go down the right branch. The bubble simply blind posts the data that came from Slack to the URL of the other flow. And if that doesn't make total sense, I'm just going to go back to one of these other flows. I'm going to open up the listener, and just remember we looked at this URL here. So every listener has its own URL. These ones that are on this flow are Celigo listeners, meaning like they're just internal to the Celigo product itself, but you can post to them using URLs, and that's what this router flow is doing. Okay, so, and then to connect to these internal endpoints, you would have a connection. Let me zoom this up a bit. To the Celigo Integrator IO API itself. So just make sure you have a connection to api.integrator.io. It's token-based auth, and then to create tokens, you're going to go over to the API tokens page, and you can just create a bearer token. It's really straightforward to do that. You can give your token full access to the whole product, just to get started. If you're a brand new user, brand new account, don't have a lot of security stuff to deal with, you can do full access. But when you want to lock stuff down, you can actually limit the scope on the tokens, and I'm not going to show that because I don't want to go over to my tokens page for our production account. You can limit the scope to just being able to post to specific listeners. Like you can actually say this token can only post records to this specific listener on another flow. So they get very granular. Okay, so here we have a flow that its sole purpose is to intercept messages from Slack, because again, Slack apps require just one listener URL, and then it routes records to other flows via posting to those flows' listener URLs. Okay, hopefully that all made sense. I'm going to show one final thing that's a little bit more advanced. Developers are going to love this, but there's another kind of magical way to implement this. And so you can do the same implementation using JavaScript. And so here on my listener bubble that, again, processes every message coming from Slack before they go anywhere, I have a pre-save page hook. And so let's go look at this function. So I have a function called pre-process Celigo AI posts. And then, again, I talked about this. I'm kind of doing some basic validation and discarding records that don't pass the validation. And then here's where I'm doing the routing just with code. And I have a flag on my flow that kind of controls, should I do this routing via JavaScript or should I do it with the branching? And I'll show that in a minute as well. So again, this line right here is, hey, if there's a setting on my flow saying, hey, route via script or route via the branching. And if route via script is true, then what I'm going to do is look at the message. If the channel is, one of my channel IDs, I'm going to route to, I have to go and get the ID of that listener bubble in one flow. And then if it's another channel, I get the ID of that other listener bubble from the other flow. And then we have this API that you can call within your JavaScript called, it's in the so up here, let's highlight this. So if you import exports, I call it IO API exports. I like to rename it because exports is really an ambiguous term in our product. But it's within this exports resource. I call it IO API exports. You can run that, and you just give it the ID of the one you want to run. So we're basically saying, hey, run an export, which is a listener. And here's the ID, and then here's the data. And I'm just passing the data from Slack as is. And that's it. So you just say that and run, and it'll actually go with the JavaScript, invoke that other listener directly, sending the data to that flow. And so you're doing it now all within a JavaScript. And then I don't return, this is another key part. So because I'm routing the data in a script, I'm not returning the data in the pre-save page hook. The pre-save page hook returns no data, which means the flow doesn't do anything else. It's done. It's only getting the initial data and using a script to route it, and then it itself is done. If this flag is not true, then I just pass the data as is, and then it goes down all the branching. Okay, so, and again, I like that because it's just this, every time I want to add a new channel branch, I don't have to go add a new bubble and a new branch to the, with criteria. I find it, I don't know, as a developer, I find it tedious to do all this stuff in the UI. So doing it in the script is just super easy to just add 2 more lines of code every time I want to add a new one. And then, okay, so I talked about a flow level setting that's controlling this. And so that's also really cool to look at real quick. So you can do settings at any place in the product. But here I did one at the flow. So within the flow settings, down at the bottom, there's a custom settings section. And you can see that there's this field called use pre-save page script to route. And so to do that, I used our form builder to say, hey, here's a new field that I want to add. Here's the ID, here's the help text, here's the label. And then when it saves into our settings object that's behind the scenes with the ID that you give it. And then when you can kind of preview what it looks like and so on. With this, this AF editor, and and then you just have a nice little way to say if this is true, then it's going to use the script. If it's false, then it's going to use the branching in the flow. So really, really elegant way. I mean, you can do lots of cool things in your flows using these custom form fields and custom settings. And then again, in your script itself, it's just now reading the value and then deciding to do one thing versus another. You can use those in mappings, transforms, all kinds of places you can take advantage of using those things. So, okay, so I think that's it. So again, in this video, we covered, how do you connect Slack to your iPaaS? Lots of cool things you can do when Slack and iPaaS are connected. And then, when you start connecting Slack to your iPaaS, you're probably going to get to a point where you want to have each separate Slack solution in its own separate flow so that those can just run independently of each other. Different people can build and manage and maintain them and deal with errors if there are any. And so you'll find you probably want that. And so I've also covered how to create one flow where its sole purpose is to route data to other flows. And so we see this here. Okay, thank you everyone for your time, and have a wonderful day. Bye.